you guys are a bunch of nobodies. Like, G2 had Mixwell, Liquid had Scream. It's still like a really difficult fight, having to like kind of pitch myself, kind of convince people that I know what I'm doing, that I am good at my job, that I should be a no-brainer. It's very hard for people to take women seriously in the first place, I think. Just hold your hand in this mic and do whatever you want with this hand. Like, if you want to be an airbender, I don't give a shit.
Hey, I'm here with Yinsu Collins, who's been on the analyst desk, who's done interviews, who has a storied history in journalism and sports. Welcome, Yinsu, and did I miss anything with that introduction?
I've also been on Valoranting.
Yes, you've also been on Valorant, a treasured guest on our other show. So I know that you did kind of traditional sports before you ever got involved in esports, came from a journalistic background. But I'm curious, like, what drove your love of sports, the traditional variety at least?
I think that's one of my first loves. I always say that it was movies and sports. Growing up, I was very much into watching both, being involved in both. I played a lot of sports growing up as well, and I just was a very, very keen and obsessive football, which I believe you guys call that soccer over there, but that feels like a crime for me to say. I was a very big football fan, rugby fan, like Formula One. I watched, like, devoured everything from a very young age. And then at university, I was studying some subjects that just felt very difficult to convert to like a real job. Um, and I kind of looked into the avenue of how to kind of be more involved in the world of sports, and journalism was just like a natural thing. Every subject that I thrived in was very much like the essay subjects, not the sciencey ones, the arty ones. So it was like a natural progression thing that made sense for me. And I kind of gave myself I did 5 years at university, which is a lot over here in England. People usually do 3 years. So by the time I graduated, there was a very much sense of like, I gotta make sure those 5 years counted. I gotta do something I care about, do something I like. So I kind of gave myself an extra bit of work to do to get into journalism. And in the UK, if you want to be a qualified journalist, you need to get like it's almost like a law conversion. I compare it to, like, you need the qualifications. You can't just kind of willy-nilly turn up at a newspaper or broadcast station and be like, "Hey, I want a job." They basically only give you an interview at the bare minimum if you have a certain qualification. So I had no choice really. I was like, "Oh, I'm kind of enjoying doing some like student radio, student newspaper." So I got to get this essentially a piece of paper to allow me to get further into the world. And yeah, I just did that. I was like, it took about 10 months to get the qualification, which is not too bad on the grand scheme of things. And that just opened a door of like everything that I could do really when it came to working in football. When people ask me like, do you just watch sports all day? Yeah. Pretty much what I do. That is part of the job, like, you gotta watch a lot of it, and I really enjoyed it. I got to go to, like, football clubs and interview players, I got to sit in press conferences, I got to, like, produce a little bit as well on air, so it was a very, very rewarding job, but, I think you might ask me as to why I left, but I think while it was rewarding, it was I don't wanna beat around the bush because there's a lot of issues when it comes to representation, opportunities, and diversity. And I don't think it takes a genius to work out that not many people working in sports broadcasting in the Western world look remotely like me. There's barely any women, let alone like women coming from a minority background. So for me, not that I had no choice, but I was very much aware of what my future could potentially look like. And I just thought, this is not the time for me. Doesn't matter how hard I grind, how much I work, how knowledgeable I am at what I do, and how presentable I might look in front of a camera, the opportunity doesn't exist. Like, it's not going to happen for me right now. And although there are still issues in gaming and esports, but the opportunities and the representation, the diversity is so much better. Like, we're ahead by miles, and I think that really gave me kind of the encouragement to hop over and try and do some stuff over here.
For sports, what was the drive of your love? Was it seeing someone win from behind? Was it learning about particular people's stories and where they came from and how they got here? What drove that love?
Everything you just said and more, I think. My favorite footballer of all time, a little bit controversial, is Zlatan Ibrahimovic, and he got me through some tough times. I will say his books, and I would say that I'm just quite inspired by the element of competition. It wasn't just football; like I was also really into like watching the Olympics, like I said, rugby, Formula One, and everything. And yeah, I just really enjoy the competition side. The community too is great, and I think it's just a lifestyle at this point. Like a lot of people don't see their love for these teams as a hobby. People kind of like plan their whole lives around it. I know people that will literally like their idea of going on vacation is going to like the Euros or the World Cup. Like they won't really go on vacation. They're saving their money for those kind of things. And I would say that I was one of them, one of those people. Still am. Yeah.
When you look back at traditional sports, was there a watershed moment where you saw like an interview or someone win something where it changed from love to I want a job doing this?
Yeah, I think Jose Mourinho had a fantastic press conference at Real Madrid where he basically called out a bunch of reporters, essentially. He was like, I know you guys hate me, you don't want to see me succeed and all this stuff. And it was like a bit of a fourth wall breaking moment for me. There were loads of moments like that, I would say, actually. I think just on the side, because um contrary to popular belief, like in esports, people are like, "Oh, I don't watch the desk. I just want to watch the game." I'm the opposite. I want to watch everything, and I think it was very much the same for sport. Like I watched every interview, every pre-match, every post-match, every match of the day, which is a very niche thing that only exists in England. It's like a review show of everything that happens. And I watched like similarly at the Olympics as well. Actually, the Olympics gave me some really crazy moments because those moments I think are more inspirational because almost every story of the athletes at Olympics, it's like a zero to hero. It's always some kind of an underdog story, a zero to hero, an unknown, a record breaking moment. It happens every single time. Um, and I think I saw a lot of those moments that inspired me. And yeah, I definitely dreamt of being the reporter, 100%. But again, just sometimes like it is sad that the things that hold us back are not based on like merit or isn't it doesn't come like I think we as a society like to preach this idea the harder you work, the more you'll be rewarded and you're gonna get to where you want to be as long as you put the hard work in. Sadly, sometimes that is true, but sometimes that is not. So it was actually really tough for me to kind of eventually leave that all behind because it was a big dream of mine. But I do think that one day I would try and go back to it, see what happens.
Sounds great. Now, the other half of the equation, of course, is the gaming part. So I
Yeah.
know that you have a love of Pokemon. How did you get from Pokemon to League of Legends?
First of all, who doesn't like Pokemon? I think like if you are a millennial and maybe after and you haven't I would say the only people that don't like Pokemon are the ones that have never played Pokemon. Like, I just cannot imagine anyone picking up Pokemon as a child and being like, "Ah, this is mid." Although I guess nowadays kids have, like, so much more. Back then, we didn't have, like, that as many choices. But I was very much like a playing underneath my duvet after my mum is like, "You need to go to bed," and I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, sure," and then she's, like, opening the door every 5 seconds and me pretending like I'm asleep, but I'm literally just, like, on my Game Boy playing. I was that kind of person, and it's quite funny because me and my mum do talk about this. She used to be like, "You're wasting so much of your life, like, playing these games," like, she had to take away, like, my laptop, like, the family computer, like, she had to, like, put me on lockdown and stuff because she was genuinely like, "You play games too much. It's a waste of time." And now I like to throw that back at her, being like, "Well, it's like kind of paid off a little bit." So now you see why I do it. And it's a wholesome moment between us. But when I was a child, like just wanting to get on the PC, and mom was like, "No, not happening," and like taking away the keyboards and stuff was a very sad time. But I would say I gamed a lot when I was growing up, but a lot of my friends didn't as much. Like it was hard to make friends in real life that had that interest until I got to university. So when I got to university, everyone played League of Legends. It was like a really big craze, and it was like a no-brainer for me. And fun fact, I used to play League of Legends on a trackpad, like because I didn't have a mouse. Um, that's how I started. That was fun. And that was basically, I think, my first exposure to esports was from COD. I used to watch a lot of like Call of Duty YouTubers, and then I watched them compete as well competitively. And then it was basically League of Legends because I was like, oh, this is a really cool game. But all my friends would be like, oh yeah, we're gonna watch Worlds. Like, can't wait to see like how this guy's playing at Worlds. And I'm like, what the heck is Worlds? And then I would used to be like, okay, this is quite cool. I was a mid laner, so when all the mid laners are doing really well in these big esports competitions, I used to like try and copy them and play their like builds, play like their champions and stuff. And from there, it kind of just snowballed because I already watched so many sports. It was just like an extra one that I could add on to my calendar, and it made a lot of sense for me. Yeah.
What was there a watershed moment for figuring out like, oh, esports is something that I could take these journalistic skills, these sports skills, and bring them over?
Yeah, this actually happened when I was at Sky. So this was for the CS:GO London Major. This was a few years ago, many, many years ago. And Sky had a broadcasting right. So they were allowed to broadcast the CS:GO Major like on their YouTube channel. But when I was in the newsroom, a lot of people kind of like overlooked this specific like thing they had. So everybody was kind of like, "Oh, we have to do a little section about the CS:GO major," but nobody knew what the heck it was. And I remember my news editor being like, "Hey, I seem to remember you mentioning that you kind of like gaming stuff. Do you want to take a look at this story?" And I was like, "Oh, that's kind of cool. Yeah, I'm really into gaming." And then I opened up like basically whenever you get sent a news story, it's usually a press release, and there's like a lot of info in this like pack. And I looked at it. I was like, for a second, in the back of my mind, I was like, "Oh, this is probably gonna be some FIFA stuff because it's, like, a lot of FIFA going on in Sky. At Sky, it's probably not gonna be, like, esports, it's gonna be more, like, on the gaming side." And as soon as I saw it was the London CS:GO Major, I was like, "Why is no one else like understanding that this is a big deal?" Like these kind of esports events do not happen in the UK very often, and it's the major. And I just basically was like, yeah, I will happily take this on. And eventually they sent me to the major. Like they asked me to go and do a little bit of stuff here and there. And for me, that was wild. That I didn't even realize that that was an avenue. And I met loads of other journalists who were in esports. So I was like, "Oh wow, like other people exist in this domain. This is crazy, like a whole big new world." And I think I just got lucky because no one else knew what CS:GO was. And it kind of just snowballed from there. So like the next time there was another story about esports, it just like automatically got put on my desk. It got to a point where everybody just started to see me as like, "Oh yeah, that girl who's really into gaming." And I just basically was allowed to do like all of the esports stories. I kind of monopolized. I basically had my like one man department where I was allowed to do it, and very grateful for that opportunity. Yeah.
Was there a standout story that you covered that was outside the wheelhouse? Because I know previously you've said that you got everything and some of them were a little out there.
Yeah, I mean, the FIFA stuff I just like had to do. I just, you have to do it when you're working at a place where they think the most important esport is FIFA, which is quite amusing. Because as you know, in our world, like that's what like a tier three esport, if anything. And I think being able to go to Worlds and MSI was kind of nuts. And having the opportunities to interview like Caps and Perks and like all of these crazy legendary well now Caps is legendary. At the time he would have been like a new kid on the block. But having those opportunities were wild. And I don't think it's funny to me because no one else in that newsroom would ever give a shit about interviewing someone like Caps. Whereas in the esports world, I feel like you don't say no to that. Like you're not gonna turn that down. So I think having being privileged enough to be able to be invited by Riot to go to all these like massive, crazy events was really, really surreal.
Make sure to subscribe to Valoranting because they ask some pretty good questions, so you don't want to miss out on the answers.
What do you remember about interviewing Irissia, the Street Fighter 5 player?
Yeah, of course. Oh, she's great. So this was back in used to be like a tournament series in the UK called Gfinity. So the UK esports scene is really underfunded and is really poor. Not many opportunities. Rarely any big UK players ever make it. Like it's unheard of. I think Valorant has somehow propelled loads of UK talent into the forefront. But yes, there was this tournament, and I had discovered that there was a female Street Fighter player that was competing. And again, as you know, like not many women competing in esports, any really games. And that was a really big deal to me. And I was like, oh, I really want to speak to her, find out her story, and kind of talk to the underrepresented people in the scene as well. I think in my career so far, I've managed to talk to a lot of female players and people who I feel like deserve more of a platform because they're obviously fighting an uphill battle as well.
Now, obviously, like you've said, you left the traditional sports newscasting type of deal. But is there anything from that that you feel like you've brought into esports that's been very effective or successful?
Massively. I think professionalism is one. I think, like I said, for me to set foot in a newsroom, I had to do a 10-month qualification. I had to pass exams. I had to study like super, super hard. And a lot of that was like about etiquette, about law, about like not getting sued, and what you can and can't publish, how you should behave in a press conference and so on. And I think having that background, I think it really helped me to kind of propel myself, especially in the early part of my career, to be taken more seriously. Again, it's very hard for people to take women seriously in the first place, I think. And I wanted to be taken seriously. I wanted people to know that I was here to do my job and to be professional and to try and get like as much as possible out of various stories and narratives and so on. So I think that kind of discipline that I got from working in a more strict newsroom, I would say, definitely really helped me. I'm really thankful for it because I think I would have been very lost otherwise, like coming into a whole new kind of a scene and industry, and you have to like learn how everything works over here. But I think I was already pretty confident in the fact that I did a lot of interviewing already. I was really proud of my writing, so I wouldn't change that path for anything.
Did you have any role models or people in the traditional sports media or otherwise that you looked up to when you were now or then?
Yeah, at the time, I really looked up to a woman called Gabby Logan. She's an English woman who's she does a lot of broadcasting. She does a lot of the stuff at the Olympics, and she's a very professional, knowledgeable, kind of like a headstrong woman. She's been in a couple of controversies here and there, which I won't go into, but definitely at the time, I was like, oh, I really like the way that she presents herself and the way that she didn't take shit from people, which is I feel like it's the attitude you need in order to thrive in some of the stuff that I do. And definitely because I watched so much League of Legends, I shocks for me, part of my pun, was a big shock because I had no idea that kind of the face of that esports scene was first of all a woman and second of all someone that was so talented. So I think pretty much from the first day that I tuned in to a professional League of Legends match, and that I saw Shocks, like, on the desk and stuff and doing her interviews too, I was just, like, m mind blown by how good she was and how everybody also recognized her talent, which is something I feel like she doesn't get enough credit for. Yeah, even now. I keep saying this because obviously I got nominated for an award, the Esports Award, which is cool, but in my mind, that award shouldn't exist because it's by default Shocks until she decides that she doesn't wanna do this anymore in my opinion. I don't think they even should nominate people. I think they should just give it to her until one day she's like, "Oh, I wanna retire," and then maybe they can, like, call it the Shocks Award or something. That's what I would do.
You came from journalism and writing, and now we're very much in a like video world, as we're doing right now. What do you think is like lost when you take away the writing portion of journalism or sports coverage and translate everything onto video?
That's a really good question because I still read a lot of long form stuff. Like I'm a very big fan of reading like long form features and investigations and stories. But also I watch a lot of documentaries. I think there's the print media is going out of kind of like fashion, which is a bit of a shame. I do miss writing a lot because I feel like when you're writing, you can tell a more fantastical story. I think when it's a video thing, is very much like you get the info you need and you bounce. Having said that though, there's a lot of documentaries I feel like works better as a documentary because you need to see like the raw emotions of certain things. Um, yeah, I like both forms. Like ideally I like to keep doing both, but sadly I just don't have time. Yeah.
Esports, very young, there can be a lot of drama, and a lot of the successful news coverage could feel like just kind of delving into drama for drama's sake. How do you, one, view that kind of holistically, and what are your thoughts on it? And then two, how do you make sure that when you're interfacing as either an analyst or interviewer or writing something, that you're not just doing drama?
I think there's two folds to this. I think people forget that not people forget that when they watch drama or other people having going through hard times or whatever, people forget that that's not entertainment. I think people like that they can call it entertainment. I think I also fall into that trap. For example, I there's a lot of chess drama that's happening right now, and I revel in it. Like I watch everything that's to do with this piece of chess drama because I'm very interested in chess to begin with, and also to me it's like a scandal almost, and that I just want to know some kind of resolution to it. I think people tend to have that approach to everything, and it gets to a point where like people just forget that there's a person on the other side of the screen. I myself have inadvertently been dragged into like certain bits of drama that I didn't want to be. And I'm not a big fan of it. I think I think I could probably do quite well as maybe like a roster leaker because obviously I'm quite close to a lot of the people in the scene, or to try and build my career around that. And I respect people that do, to be fair, because it is still journalism in my opinion at the end of the day. But that comes with drama. I think that's one of the things that attracts a lot of drama in the scene right now. And I just don't want to be involved personally. I want to steer away from it. I understand that people see it as entertainment. Sometimes, in some cases, I also probably fall into that trap. But on the whole, it's not why I want to be doing what I'm doing. It doesn't interest me. It's not something that I feel like would bring me any enjoyment or fulfillment. But I mean, people are gonna do what they're gonna do. I think the most like trendy thing to say these days is like, "Oh, I gotta farm some impressions." Um, but like, what's impressions gonna do? It's not gonna feed me. Like my way of farming impressions is like I'll post a photo of me and Jake doing something, and I'm like, that's just impressions. And to be fair, like I like sharing bits of our lives because I know other people really like that side of us, and they kind of want to know what we're up to. And I think we're quite cute, so I'm like, yeah, the world deserves more kind of like low level wholesomeness as opposed to just like crazy drama that, like you said, that people like to generate online. I see both sides, but maybe I'm a boomer, you know. I stay out of it.
So when you're interviewing someone, when you are on the analyst desk, you are molding and curating narratives and stories. What are some of like the pillars of thought or theme that's in your mind when you're doing that to make sure that you're always navigating that in the best possible way?
A lot of the times it will be a collaborative effort. I will put my hand up and say that I'm very bossy, and again like my heroes are like Quickshot and Shocks and Machine, like people who all have a lot of input on the desk. Like you get a feeling like they're controlling the desk. You know, it's their desk. They're just kind of like maneuvering between the analysts and stuff and like keeping it flow. And they're all extremely knowledgeable people, and they like to like push their analysts, ask the right questions. And I've kind of modeled myself after that. I don't like being the kind of host that just comes in and reads, you know, off a teleprompter and just like take my paycheck and go home. I like to try and I like to basically imagine that I am trying to sell something that is incredibly exciting to people that don't give a shit. This is like the way I always tell people. I'm like, I would come in and kind of look at the games that's happening. Like you said, look at the themes, narratives. And if it is like, oh yeah, this team, they've never won a trophy before, they've always come second. You know, that today that maybe they're gonna break that curse. I wanna be pretty over the top about this and just imagine that the people that are watching us don't give a shit. Like, I mean, a lot of them don't. Like they don't care, they just wanna watch the game. I wanna be like, hey, what you're about to witness could potentially be like historical. You know, I wanna be very like flamboyant about it. Because I think even if it's not that big of a deal, just painting it as something that people should pay attention to, I think will overall increase the level of enjoyment for them. And that's why I love watching some of the broadcasters that do that. You know, they make everything so poetic and like it's a story and you get so bought into it. Like the world's final we just had, which is like the greatest League of Legends world final of all time. And I don't think a single person was not sold on the story that the broadcast team, the players, Riot, content team tried to sell. And in my opinion, if I can do that every single time I get on the desk, that's like the biggest win ever. Like, admittedly, you don't always, things don't always come across the way that you want to, which is why we gotta like keep improving. But that honestly show for me is just like the pinnacle. I think everybody should be looking towards that, being like, how do we sell what we're doing to the way that Ryan managed to do? What, a couple weeks ago? No, it was like less than a week ago. Yeah, a week ago.
Fucking tragic to watch Faker lose. It was so sad. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm
Deft.
not.
Oh, great. Yeah, whatever. Faker's my
I love
team.
Faker. Yeah, I love Faker and I love T1, but I wanted Def to win too. I
God
was
damn it.
fully behind DRX.
It's
Yeah.
really hard not to root for him.
Yeah.
What goes into prepping for the interviews that you do when you want to make sure that you're able to tell a compelling story?
I'm probably in a lucky position now in the scene that I know almost every single person I interview on like a acquaintance basis. You know, like I know what their tendencies are like. I know roughly what they're like in interviews, how their mood will be depending on what happens in the games. There are probably like a handful of players that I know well enough that I know that I could really push them, like be very cheeky, very hard hitting with my questions. I think I wouldn't do that to everyone, but the goal that I tend to want to get across is to have me learn something that I didn't know before. I would say that I probably, I would say that I'm pretty knowledgeable about the players in the game. And if I could learn some things through what I'm asking that I didn't know before, I know for a fact that everyone else will as well. And I just, that's kind of the way I approach it. And obviously it's narrative driven, right? So, um, depending on what happens in the games and how big of a situation it is, I will kind of tailor my questions to that. But I will say that I put in a lot of work when it comes to those things because I love doing interviews. It's probably my favorite thing to do, which not a lot of hosts say. I think a lot of hosts don't like doing interviews. It's almost like they have to. They prefer to be on the desk. I like being on the desk as well, but my bread and butter is always interviews. Like I like talking to people and kind of seeing how they react to things and getting to hear their perspective of everything that I thought was going on. Because obviously, when you're watching the game, I have a somewhat of an idea in my head, like I wonder why they did this, and I would try and guess. But it's nothing better than kind of like hearing it from the horse's mouth. Um, so yeah, I hope I get to do interviews as long as I'm in this scene. Because sometimes I get really salty if I don't get to do interviews. Other people know this as well. They're like, "Oh, she's gonna be annoyed about not getting this interview." But I can't do everything, right? And I'm just a very big first world problem. But I think the players are aware as well that I'm a keen bean when it comes to that.
Can you walk me through what your step-by-step processes. If you're doing an interview with a player and you know you want to build up to what might be considered a combative or difficult question, do you try and lure them in with a couple of easy ones? Do you set the tone right away? How do you approach trying to get those spicy questions in that will then elicit maybe not like a nice reaction, but a meaningful one?
I think one of the examples I can give is probably an interview I did with Durka from Fnatic. Obviously, Durka and I are friends. Like I would say that we're friends. We're not just like he's not just someone that I have to like talk to because he's a pro player and I have to interview him. And because of the relationship we have, I know it's very easy for me to just hit him with it. Like, I don't need to butter him up and be like, you didn't do well. Like, what happened here and there, and I think this was a learning curve as well because a lot of people were most people were like, "Wow, like that was a super insightful interview," because I straight up just said, "How the hell did you manage to turn your tournament around when the first 2 games you played were quite frankly extremely underwhelming for the level of expectations that we had for you guys?" Like, the first 2 games were disastrous. We can't sugarcoat that, but you've only had 3 days to turn things around and you look like a different team today, you know, like, how did that happen? And I think a lot of people didn't like the way that I asked it because 'cause they're like, "Oh, they just won, you shouldn't be putting them down." But in my view, it was like, this is a team that was coming to this tournament to finish expected to finish top 4, but they got knocked out, I think, 5th. They ended up finishing 5th, but they lost their opening game. They looked like ridiculously bad. They were also expected to do super well on the new map that came out as well. So basically, they just looked horrendous. Um, and I think if he wasn't a player that I was super familiar with, I probably wouldn't have just been so blasé with it. But I know he doesn't have an issue with that. He gave me a great answer, and we can like banter a little bit after that, back and forth. And I think people that don't know that we have that kind of relationship could see that and be like, "Oh my god, that's a bit jarring." Like, she's just called them shit, which they were. Um, she just called them shit. Like, that's a bit too much. And bless Durka, like he reacted in a pretty normal way, just answered the question. I think it's hard to get that context across. I think in that situation, I knew I could get away with it, but the other people didn't know. So I think I will probably try and not do it like that in the future next time, even with someone that I'm super familiar with. But I think on the other side, when it came to like prepping for a more difficult question, if it was someone that I wasn't familiar with, I would probably just tell them ahead of we going live. I don't think there's anything worse than like dropping something on someone in front of like hundreds and thousands of people without their consent or knowledge and just for the sake of seeing them react. Like, I'm definitely not the kind of person that would give people my interview questions ahead of time because I think that kind of takes away the authenticity of their answers. But at the same time, if I know I'm going to ask something that they might be uncomfortable with, I would always just tell them. Not the question itself, but I would be like, "Hey, are you comfortable with maybe discussing this? I know it might be a little bit sensitive, like, no worries if not." And 9 out of 10 times, they would say that's fine. But I think it's better to kind of give them that heads up than to just on air randomly in front of everyone just dropping something that could be perceived as a little bit inflammatory. Again, it really differs from player to player. There are some players that would thrive. Some players I feel like they want me to ask them something just so they can like give something spicy. And some players they really don't enjoy that. Some players they just prefer to kind of like talk about what happened in the game and just be more positive and move on with it. It is really down to experience. I think there's no kind of correct or wrong way of doing something like that. But of course, when I first started, I made tons of mistakes. When I first started, there were a couple of times I definitely read the situation a bit wrong, and I thought maybe I could banter or push a little bit, and it backfired. They weren't comfortable, or there were times where I felt like maybe this is not the time, but then afterwards, I realized they were more kind of relaxed. I could have probably pushed them a bit more. But yeah, definitely comes with the experience. But once you get to know them, I mean, there's only a finite amount of players. Once you get to know most of them, all of them, I think you can get to a pretty comfortable place where it feels more of like a collaboration than just like me putting them on a spot and forcing them to talk to me.
I know you've said previously that we're lucky to have Angel in the Valorant scene
Oh
with
yeah.
a great personality and everything. Can you talk about like what it is about certain players outside of the game that really brings that extra engagement or feeling, emotion, those types of qualities that we find so electrifying?
Now, Angel is someone that you could ask him any questions for. But if you ask him a stupid question, or if you are like say something that's blatantly disrespectful, he'll call you out. Like he's not gonna be afraid to be like, the heck is this? Like, like don't be like that. I think he's very entertaining, and I think some people what people forget is as much as like you watch the games for the game. Like we love Valorant, we want to watch some good games. You're not watching the game for the game. You're watching the game for the players. Because if everybody watched the game just for the game, then every single game would have like fucking huge viewership. Like if people didn't care who's playing, they'll be like, oh, I just love Valorant. Then every game will have like an equal amount of viewership. But that's not how life works. Same as sports. Like I like football, but I'm not gonna watch Nottingham Forest. I'm really sorry. I don't know why I flamed them of all teams. But eh, and the players that I feel like people usually kind of gravitate towards are either like insanely good players, like your Faker, your Simple, your Yays, or players that are just very, very, very entertaining. Like it almost doesn't really matter if they're good or not. They're just entertaining, whether they like BM a lot, they're a little bit toxic, or maybe they're just like super wholesome, like Deft, for example, have a great story behind them. And in the game, I think that's so important, but I think a lot of that is built by what they do outside of the game. Now, Valorant is already a little bit problematic, I would say. Some of the fan base, player base, community can be problematic. I still think it's on the minority side. On the whole, I think it's a really nice community. Um, and I think all of the bad things people do always like are at the forefront of people's attention. And of course, there's going to be toxic people anywhere. It's going to be toxic Valorant players. There's going to be toxic people that, I don't know, work in a library. That's just how the world works. But when you come across players who are like really entertaining, but just also great people, like really great people to talk to, knowledgeable, entertaining, but not in the bad ways, not in the kind of like they're a piece of shit, therefore Twitter is like going off making this person infamous. But more of just they're funny, or they're willing to kind of market themselves in that way. I think that those are kind of almost like the gems of our scene. Angel's definitely one of them, and it helps that they're also good at the game. Like if they're good at the game is even a bonus, because that's like a role model. That's like what the community is going to be built on. People are going to watch these players who they love, who are great people, incredible players, very entertaining, and they're probably watching that, wanting to get involved in the pro scene, and who knows, they might be like the next Angel, the next Tens, or whatever. And for me, I think that is what gaming should be about, not the stupid like bitchy fights on Twitter and people stirring up drama and all that stuff, which I'm sure a lot of people find that entertaining, but for me, it's not what the game is about.
I know that you, when you were managing Team Summon FC, gave a fair amount of media training to Boaster and the team.
Yeah.
Is that something that you do kind of with other players?
Some players, if they want me to, yeah, a lot. There will be a couple of players that will say to me, they're like, "Hey, I'm really nervous doing a broadcast interview. I hope like some of them will straight up be like, I hope it's with you because I know you, and can you like ease my nerves a little bit with certain things, which I'm very happy to do. And some of them have in the past been like, I literally don't know what to like, how to behave or what to say. Like, can you just help me? And yeah, I actually really enjoyed doing that. The summer one was funny because I was so convinced, and I still am. I was just like, you guys are a bunch of nobodies. Like G2 had Mixwell, Liquid had Scream. You guys are like, no one knows who you are. And we have to boost you somehow, because even if you start getting traction, like on the server, which thankfully they did, that doesn't guarantee them being signed by a good org. So I was kind of hell bent on being like, come on, boys, we got to like get you camera ready, media ready, interview ready. So you're going to have some kind of personality when people watch you for the first time at First Strike, and get your brands going. And I'm really, I don't know what they would say about it. I think at times they were like, oh, why is this bitch forcing us to do this? Like, this is so not fun. Um, but I'm really proud of them because every single one of them, because there are teams where like, oh, this person doesn't really do interviews, or like, you're not going to be able to get this person. And I was very proud that every single one of those players from the start of their career till now have never shied away from the cameras, the interviews, the content, and they still continue, even though a lot of them are not on Fnatic anymore. I still see them do other bits and bobs, and I'm like, God, like they probably didn't think that they could do this when I first met them, when they first kind of like came on the scene. And that's one thing I tell all players as well. I'm like, up and coming players, try and just get your interviews out of the way. Like, even if you don't think it's worth it, trust me, it's gonna be good for your like own brand and careers going forward.
So we have you to blame for how comfortable Boaster is on camera, twerking and doing all that shit, huh?
To be fair, he was already really comfortable doing that. I think it was more I had to hone. He's a blabber. Like, he doesn't know when to stop. So what we worked on with him was literally like, you need to like limit yourself a little bit so you're not like taking over the whole show and the whole interview every time you're on screen. So for him, it was like opposite, the other way around. Yeah.
You 9 months ago had an interview with Richard Lewis, or a podcast,
Mhm.
and during it you said that you still felt like an egg that you hadn't hatched yet. Now that you've done 2 champions, you're about to do the Game Changers Championship. Do you
Mhm.
feel like you've quote unquote hatched?
No. I mean, first of all, I love Richard Lewis. I should have definitely, yeah, in terms of journalism, he is, I think, everyone's like role model hero. And he actually helped me through a lot of like pretty uh bad stuff that I went through, in the community when it came to how to handle certain things. And I just can't possibly see myself as anything other than an egg when I'm surrounded by people that have been like, I work with Pansy a lot, like, she's been casting for, like, 10 years. I think that's when you can really, see yourself as more of an expert, like, yeah, I'm nowhere near that level in my mind, definitely not, and also, I think the lack of security in the scene, it kind of maybe reaffirms some of my self-doubts because, like, even in the off season right now, um, even though I've done 2 champions, and in my mind, I feel like I am one of the staples of the Valorant broadcast, at least. In the off season, when it comes to, like, being hired for tournaments and third-party tournament organizers, it's still, like, a really difficult fight having to, like, kind of pitch myself, kinda convince people that I know what I'm doing, that I am good at my job, that I should be a no-brainer, for example, when it comes to things like that. I think when I still have to fight that hard, it definitely makes me feel like I'm nowhere near where I, want to be at.
Can you give me a rundown of your biggest pet peeves for interviews and interviewing people?
Ooh, oh my god, I have so many. Um, I think oh god, I actually have so many. I mean, I watch a lot of interviews, so I think I'm pretty good at being able to see what's a good one and what's not a good one. I mean, I usually watch like the good ones. I think James Banks is a terrific interviewer. I think so much of what he does, I wish I could do because he's so like charming when he interviews people. Um, I think my biggest pet peeve when it comes to maybe being interviewed or maybe me interviewing someone else is more of, this is so this is such like a stupid thing. Like, you're literally gonna be like, "What the hell is she talking about?" But when they don't when they, use their hands to gesture what they're saying, but they use their mic hand. So I ask them a question and they go, "Oh, yeah," and they start doing this, and I'm like, "Oh, please just hold your hand in this mic and do whatever you want with this hand. Like, if you wanna fucking be an airbender, I don't give a shit." But it always like, it makes me panic so much. 'Cause I'm like, "Oh god," like, "Oh, no one can hear what they're saying," but I can't correct them. I don't know how to, like, properly be like, "Can you speak to the mic, please?" But yeah, that's probably the one thing that makes me panic the most. Yeah, it's happened a few times actually, more often than you'd think.
I hate crossing over instead of doing this.
Oh, yeah.
Crossing
Luckily,
over.
I've never had to do that. Luckily, they always give them a mic, so I'm just minding my own business. Because, like, I guess this is like post-pandemic, you know? Like, maybe we're not supposed to share one mic. It would actually be easier if I could just do it like that, because then they can just use their hands for whatever they want to do. Yeah.
The other thing I hate is over qualifying, you know, uh, and I hate when they've just won the big game. How do you feel? We know how they feel.
Yeah, I think the "Do you have a message for your fans" is good for sometimes. I think is really nice to be like, you got something you want to say to your fans, you know, they've been supporting you all this. But I think there are some occasions where I just feel like that you could probably take that question out and replace it with something else. But I think that's very situational. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, to end the interview, do you have a message for your fans?
More fans. My 2 fans out there, love you. Honestly, I wanted to be asked that question my whole life. I'm glad it was you.
Thank you so much, Yinsu, for your time. If you do have any shout outs that you want to make, you're more than welcome to make them. But Twitter.
Yeah, shout out to Van Silly. That's it.
Excellent. Shout out to Van Silly.
Yeah.